Very good morning to everyone. Thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me to share my thoughts. At this point in time, we are at a very opportune moment in the financial sector, given the significant steps that have been taken to create the infrastructure for lending, especially the digital infrastructure, and the growth that is happening now, the economic recovery that is underway. Therefore, I think the financial sector is indeed poised for phenomenal growth, and I would hope that the financial sector will avail this opportunity to generate growth, but while at the same time ensuring that the lending quality is very high. And here I want to talk about 2 or 3 important things. So if we look at the important steps that have been taken over the last few months, I think there are 3 key things that stand out for the financial sector. The first is the account aggregator that's been created. I think that's a very important step. Those of you who follow the economic survey would recall that in the 2018-19 economic survey, we had laid down the conceptual ground for this by writing this chapter, data by the people, of the people, for the people. And the account aggregator concept is essentially an implementation of that idea, because it enables all the data, relating to transactions done by individuals and and small and medium enterprises to be aggregated and shared with financial sector firms, while at the same time ensuring privacy, because all that the financial customer needs to do is to just provide his or her approval for using that data that has been aggregated through the account aggregator. So that is a very important step, the first step, because it provides the foundation of data, and to be able to do analytics, for the financial services firms. The second very important step that has been taken is the factoring bill, which has been now passed by Parliament, and which removes restrictions that were there on which all entities could get into factoring. Factoring, for working capital purposes is a very important aspect, and therefore the financial sector firms, NBFCs and banks, should avail this opportunity, along with the account aggregator that has been created to use invoices to provide credit, and that is something that is a second very important step. The third key step that I think again will really help banks and financial institutions is the launch of the e-rupee. The e-rupee is essentially a digital, you can think about it as a digital currency that can be made very particular for the end use. So, for instance, if let's say a bank wants to give credit to a carpenter for buying, a motorized saw or an automatic saw instead of the manual saw that takes time and effort, on automated saw. The bank can ensure end use, by using the e-rupees. The potential is there. This has been launched by the Honorable Prime Minister in last month. So, one of the key worries that banks typically have is to ensure that the end use of the loan that is given is indeed what is intended. So the combination of the account aggregator that's been created and the e-rupee provides the data infrastructure for banks and financial institutions to be able to now increase credit significantly to those that are being hitherto credit rationed, especially those at the bottom of the pyramid. These are both individuals and small and medium enterprises. If you look at some key data, this suggests that the financial institutions now must get into into this area. So the first fact, if you go and look at the investments in the SLR securities, the Government of India securities by banks, while the regulatory norm is 22.5%, we find many of the Indian banks, putting close to 40% in SLR securities. So way above the norm. Now that difference between 40% that is invested in GSECs versus the regulatory norm, 15-16% of their NDTL could possibly be lend, and it's about figuring out the lending model to be able to whether it's lending to the to individuals or to small and medium enterprises. So we academics and economists actually call this phenomenon lazy banking, where the bank continues investing in GSECs risk free. Does not develop the model, organizational model to be able to go and take that credit risk in order to lend, and makes a positive alpha risk adjusted return compared to investing in the risk free asset. In fact, over the last 15-16 months, we've also seen not only such investments in SLR but also reverse repo. The investment in reverse repo, where actually the bank makes a much lower return, that is also part of the same phenomenon. So I think the time now is there, with the kind of infrastructure that is being created, the data infrastructure for banks and financial institutions to move away from this phenomenon of lazy banking that we've had, where banks put a large proportion of their deposits and overall balance sheet in the GSEC, risk-free GSEC, and start taking credit risk, actually, but very well managed credit risk. And I think that these platforms now provide that opportunity to take well managed credit risk. A couple of other facts that clearly suggest that this is an opportunity for the banking sector to really utilize is also seen by the proportion of credit to GDP in the economy. India at 58% is about 1/3 of the OECD average, which is close to 160%. So on the one hand, we have such low credit penetration because of enormous credit rationing, where large sections of society and large sets of SMEs and MSMEs remain deprived of credit from the banking sector. Up until now, the banking sector could potentially argue that we don't have the data to be able to assess the ability to repay and the willingness to repay of these small and medium enterprises or these individuals. But now, with the creation of this infrastructure, digital infrastructure, I think it is time that the senior management and the boards of banks really put their heads together in how to utilize this, so that India really grows in its credit penetration. A third fact, if you look at the proportion of overall credit, the proportion of credit that goes to SMEs, over the last 25-30 years has really not increased much at all. And I think that is something also indicative of the kind of credit rationing that is there. So firstly, more than 15-16% invested in GSECs, together with the reverse repo operations. At the same time, the penetration of credit 58% with some areas, for instance, the Northeast, where the levels are actually similar to those, in very backward economies like sub-Saharan Africa. So I think that is something that India, now as the 5th largest economy, has to really fix. Here, I think and I would leave some thoughts for the boards and the CEOs to mull over. What is really important, if this opportunity has to be utilized. Having myself spent some time on a bank board, so I say that from that experience and from the experience of having done research on banking for the last 20 odd years, on Indian banking. So I think there are a couple of very important aspects that boards must focus on. As an annual metric, the proportion of the balance sheet that is being invested in GSECs is something that banks must monitor, and CEOs need to actually be questioned on why is it that this money cannot be put into credit. Why can't actually whatever we're investing in GSECs, or let's say putting it in reverse repo, why can't that be put into credit for SMEs? and also for maybe individuals, given that this framework is already there. Because I think it is very clear to me at least that the alpha that the banks will get, and alpha is basically the risk-adjusted return, where they will get will be higher than what they will get by putting it in reverse repo, certainly, and even compared to G-Sec. So I think this is something, so as an annual exercise, bank boards must ask this question from their CEOs, saying, why is it that you're actually putting so much money in the G-Secs here, and more than the regulatory norm, and why are you not coming up with a model to be able to actually take that money and put into SME lending, MSME lending, and lending to retail. A second HR aspect, I think, which is very important for boards to consider, and this is something, again, I say this from experience, having followed the Indian banking sector for a long while. I think the structure of kind of personnel that is, at the board level and at the CEO level needs a rethink, as across banks. If you look at the the kind of the data on the personnel that are there in the banking sector and overall financial services itself is there's a large proportion of chartered accountants and chartered accountant MBAs in the in the Indian financial system. And they're very good professionals, no doubt about it. They're actually excellent in their attention to details. But I think what you need is people now who will bring the technological angle, fintech angle, those who are really comfortable in technology and also in banking and finance. I think that combination is something that both boards and senior management people in the banks have to actually have. This is an HR shift that the bank boards will have to really think about. And thereby focus on getting a lot more engineer MBAs into the senior management and really focus on tech. At the same time, also I think bank boards must look to have those that are doing research on banking, and it need not be necessarily in India. It actually needs to be in areas which are where the opportunities are really brought to their attention. For instance, now there's a lot of research which also looks at ways of assessing the willingness to repay, not just the ability to repay, but even willingness to repay. I think that is an area that bank boards must focus on in ways of analytical models to be able to judge the willingness to repay. And here more broadly, I think the bank boards need to focus on one key aspect that has not received as much attention in the Indian banking sector at the macro level, which is the models, analytical models for corporate lending, MSME lending, and this in fact ties in with what I mentioned at the start as well about the opportunity that is there. So if you look at even the private sector banks, most of the private sector banks have evolved models for retail lending. But when it comes to corporate lending and especially large corporate lending, it still continues to be very, very soft information based, and not as much hard information based. So I think while there is no substitute for soft information, I'm not suggesting that soft information should be substituted, because assessing things like the willingness to repay does require a lot of soft information. But I think that soft information must now get complemented with hard information, and that is where analytical models that assess the willingness to repay are, I think, equally important, and bank boards really need to focus on. So in terms of the the opportunity that exists, I think there are three things that are happening, and I'm just summarizing what I've said. Factoring legislation, the account aggregator framework, the e-rupee. These are the three opportunities that are there. And the three key aspects that boards need to focus on in order to actually avail this opportunity is, number one, on an annual basis or maybe even on a quarterly basis, track how much of the bank's balance sheet is being invested in just risk-free securities. I think that's a very good proxy for the extent of lazy banking that is happening over a long horizon. Second, focus on the on building models, recognize that models are necessary but not sufficient. But just because they're not sufficient does not mean that they are not necessary. I think this distinction between what is necessary and what is sufficient is very important. You'll find a lot of people giving anecdotal evidence saying, hey, in this instance, the model did not work. But that is basically, just a case of the model not being sufficient, but it is still necessary. I think this mindset that, analytics and models, and are necessary, especially, in today's, banking and financial sector space. So that is the second aspect that bank boards must focus on. And third is the HR space. And here, I think it's time now that, a lot more really tech-oriented MBAs, those that understand technology really well, are the ones who can really think of the big picture very well, are focused on, and the HR profile is actually is made in such a way that this opportunity that is now India is really sitting, on and can really be utilized. Thank you very much once again for providing me this opportunity to share my thoughts. I hope that the banking sector overall and all the senior people in banking really recognize the huge opportunity. And I will leave with this final thought. If you compare the United States vis-a-vis India, one of the key things that we have done very well is that the digital infrastructure, which is a public good, it's a public good because there are, and anywhere in the world, infrastructure typically is not adequately provided by private sector because of what we economists call market failures. India has actually treated digital infrastructure as a public good and has thereby, created and has provided for it very well. Unlike, for instance, countries like the United States, which have basically not yet treated digital infrastructure as a public good. India has done that, and therefore now it is for the private sector to now leapfrog from this, enormous opportunity that has been provided. And I hope that the banking sector firms and boards and CEOs in particular will take note of this enormous opportunity that is now available with the economic recovery also proceeding very well. Thank you very much.